Commander stepped off the transport ship and onto the human colony of New Geneva. His 4 arms moved in perfect rhythm as he walked, each step heavy with the weight of military tradition. The gravity here was lighter than his, making him feel even taller than his already impressive 8-foot frame. The human delegation waited at the landing platform. They looked so small and fragile compared to his people. Ambassador, the lead human diplomat, stepped forward with a smile that showed his teeth. Knew enough about human expressions to recognize this as friendliness, though among the showing teeth meant aggression. "Welcome to New Geneva, Commander," Ambassador said in perfect. "We're honored by your visit." Nodded once, sharp and military. "The honor is mine, Ambassador. The Empire values this opportunity to discuss potential cooperation." As they walked toward the government building, studied the human settlement. It was different from colonies. Where his people built fortress cities with high walls and weapon towers, the humans had parks and open spaces. Children played in areas that would be military training grounds on a world. "Your defenses seem limited," observed. Ambassador chuckled. "We prefer to think of it as open architecture. We've found that welcoming spaces tend to create better relationships with our neighbors." This confused. Every colony was built for war. Walls to keep enemies out, weapons to destroy threats, fortifications to survive sieges. How had humans survived long enough to reach the stars with such poor military planning? The dinner that evening was held in a large hall with windows that looked out over the city. Sat at a table with several human officials, trying to understand their strange customs. They offered him food before serving themselves, which seemed backward. Leaders should eat first to show their status. "Tell me about human military philosophy," said as they ate. "Your species has survived many conflicts, yet you remain divided into separate nations. This seems inefficient." Ambassador wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin. "It's true we've had our share of wars, but we've learned that the way you fight is just as important as whether you win." "I do not understand. War is about victory, nothing else matters." "That's where we might disagree," said gently. "We've developed certain rules about how wars should be fought, laws that protect people who can't fight and make sure conflicts don't become worse than they need to be." His head tilted, an expression of deep confusion. "Laws during war? How can there be laws when you fight for survival? The enemy will use every advantage. You must do the same or die." It might seem strange, but these laws actually make us stronger fighters, not weaker ones. The other humans at the table nodded in agreement. One of them, General Martinez, leaned forward. "Our soldiers fight better when they know they're fighting for something good, not just against something bad." This made no sense to. In warfare, soldiers fought because they were ordered to fight. They conquered because the strong deserved to rule the weak. They destroyed enemies completely so those enemies could never threaten them again. "Give me an example," said. Ambassador thought for a moment. "Well, we don't torture prisoners for information. We treat wounded enemies the same as our own wounded. We protect civilians even when they're not our own people." Secondary arms moved in agitation, a clear sign of distress among his people. "You heal your enemies so they can fight you again. You protect people who might support your enemies. This is not strength. This is foolishness that will get you killed." "I understand why it might look that way," said calmly. "But think about it differently. If enemy soldiers know we'll treat them well when they surrender, they're more likely to give up instead of fighting to the death. If civilians trust us to protect them, they give us information about real threats instead of hiding from us." "But surely these are just rules for small conflicts," pressed. "When faced with a real threat, when your species itself is in danger, you abandon these limits." General Martinez shook her head. "Actually, that's when they matter most. The bigger the stakes, the more important it becomes to remember who we are and what we're fighting for." Looked around the table at the humans. They all seemed to believe what they were saying. But how could an entire species be so naive about warfare and still survive? Ambassador reached into a bag beside his chair and pulled out a thick book. The cover was written in human script, but a small device translated it into symbols, Geneva Conventions and additional protocols. "This might help explain our approach," said, placing the book in front of. "It contains many of our basic rules about warfare. Consider it light reading to help you understand how humans think about military conflict." Picked up the book with one of his secondary hands. It was surprisingly heavy. This entire book is about rules for fighting. Rules for fighting, rules for treating prisoners, rules for protecting people who can't fight, rules for what weapons can and can't be used, explained. Thousands of years of human experience turned into guidelines for conducting warfare. And your soldiers actually follow these rules, even when it might cost them victory. "Especially then," General Martinez said. "Any fool can win a battle by throwing away honor and decency. It takes real strength to win while keeping your humanity intact." As the evening ended and was escorted to his guest quarters, his mind buzzed with confusion. The humans had given him a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. They claimed that limiting their own power in war made them stronger. They said that helping their enemies was a path to victory. In his room, opened the book had given him. The first page showed a symbol, a red cross on a white background. Beneath it, words that made his head hurt to think about. The wounded and sick must be collected and cared for by the party to the conflict in whose power they may be. He closed the book and set it aside. Tomorrow he would ask the humans to explain this madness properly. There had to be some trick, some hidden meaning. No species could be this strange and still survive in a galaxy full of dangers. But as he lay down to sleep, one thought kept bothering him. If the humans were so weak and foolish, why had they never lost a war to the Empire? Why, in fact, had the mighty never dared to challenge them directly? Spent the entire night reading the human book. Every page made him more confused than the last. The translator device worked perfectly, so he knew he was reading the words correctly. But the ideas behind the words seemed impossible. "Medical personnel shall be respected and protected in all circumstances," he read aloud in his quarters. His voice carried the clicking undertones that showed deep confusion in speech. He turned to another page. "Prisoners of war must at all times be humanely treated. Any unlawful act or omission causing death or seriously endangering the health of a prisoner of war is prohibited." Set the book down and paced around his room. In warfare, captured enemies were sources of information. Pain was a tool to extract that information quickly. Dead enemies couldn't fight again. These human rules seemed designed to help their enemies rather than themselves. The next morning, he found Ambassador in the embassy garden. The human was sitting on a bench, feeding small flying creatures that the translator called birds. "Ambassador," said, his voice tight with frustration, "I have read your war rules. They make no sense." Looked up with that tooth-showing expression again. "Good morning, Commander. Which parts are giving you trouble?" "All of them." Sat heavily on the bench, which creaked under his weight. "You protect enemy doctors. You feed enemy prisoners. You refuse to attack enemy food supplies. These rules will get your soldiers killed." "Actually, they help keep our soldiers alive," said, tossing seeds to the birds. "But I can see why they might seem strange to someone raised with different military traditions." Secondary arms moved in the pattern his people used to show extreme frustration. "Do not speak to me of traditions. The Empire has conquered 17 star systems. We know warfare. These rules are not traditions. They are suicide." Was quiet for a moment, watching the birds eat. "Tell me something, Commander. How many of those 17 systems still resist rule?" "Resistance is crushed completely. No system has rebelled against the Empire in over 200 years. Because there's no one left to rebel." straightened proudly. Because we eliminate threats permanently, crush the enemy completely, and you never have to fight them again. And how many resources does it take to keep all those systems under control? This question bothered more than he wanted to admit. The Empire spent enormous amounts of money and soldiers keeping their conquered worlds in line. Entire fleets patrolled space to prevent uprisings. It was expensive, but it was the only way he knew. That is the cost of empire, he said finally. Nodded slowly. What if I told you there was a cheaper way, a way that turned former enemies into friends who helped you instead of fighting you? I would say you are telling stories for children. Let me show you something. Pulled out a small device and activated a holographic display. This is historical footage from one of our conflicts. The display showed human soldiers in a battle zone. Watched, expecting to see the efficient brutality he knew from warfare. Instead, he saw something that hurt his brain to process. Human medics were treating wounded enemy soldiers. They worked side by side with their own doctors, using the same medical supplies, showing the same care. When enemy soldiers saw the Red Cross symbol, they came forward for help instead of fighting. This is fake, said. No species is this stupid. Keep watching. The scene changed to a prisoner camp, expected to see interrogation centers and punishment facilities. Instead, he saw enemy soldiers eating regular meals, receiving medical care, and even participating in educational programs. Some were writing letters that human guards helped them send to their families. You feed them better than some colonies feed their own people, said, his voice filled with disbelief. Watch what happens next. The hologram showed the end of the conflict. Instead of the mass executions expected, he saw something unprecedented. Enemy soldiers were released and returned to their homes. Many of them spoke positively about their treatment. Some even applied to join human organizations afterward. They joined their former enemies. His voice had become very quiet. Many of them, yes. They had seen how we treated our prisoners, how we cared for their wounded, how we protected their civilians. They decided they wanted to be part of a society that valued life over conquest. Switched off the hologram and turned to face directly. Commander, in the past 50 years, how many former enemies have asked to join the Empire? Was silent. The answer was 0. No one joined the Empire voluntarily. They were conquered, controlled, and kept in line by fear and force. This is one conflict, said, but his voice had lost its certainty. You cannot judge all warfare by one small war. You're right, let me show you more. Activated the device again. This time it showed dozens of different conflicts across human space. In each one, the pattern was the same. Humans fought fiercely when they had to, but they always followed their rules. They protected civilians, treated prisoners well, and showed mercy to defeated enemies. In each case, the aftermath was similar. Former enemies became allies, neutral parties chose to support humans over their opponents, and resistance movements collapsed when people realized surrender meant safety rather than death. But surely, said desperately, when faced with a true existential threat, when your species itself was in danger, you abandoned these rules. His expression became serious. Actually, Commander, that's when we follow them most carefully. The greater the threat, the more important it becomes to remember what we're fighting to protect. He activated one more hologram. This one showed a massive space battle, ships the size of cities firing weapons that could destroy planets. Recognized it from historical records, the Human Synthesis War, where an artificial intelligence had tried to eliminate all organic life. Even facing extinction, human ships were broadcasting surrender terms to captured AI vessels. Human rescue ships were risking themselves to save enemy crew members who had been forced to serve the AI. When the war ended and the AI was defeated, humans had immediately begun working to rehabilitate and heal the organic populations that had been enslaved by their enemy. You showed mercy to an enemy that wanted to kill all organic life, whispered. We showed mercy to the organic beings that enemy had enslaved, corrected. The AI itself was too dangerous to let survive, but the people it had controlled weren't responsible for its actions. Stood up from the bench and began packing again. Everything he knew about warfare, everything the Empire had taught him about strength and survival, was being challenged by what he was seeing. How, he asked finally, how does your species survive by fighting with one hand tied behind your back? Smiled again, but this time it looked sad. Commander, we're not fighting with one hand tied behind our back. We're fighting with both hands free to do the right thing. And that, more than any weapon we've ever built, is what makes us strong. As walked back to his quarters, his mind was spinning. The humans claimed their weakness was actually strength. They said helping their enemies made them more powerful. They insisted that mercy was a weapon more effective than any gun. It was impossible. It was insane. It was completely against everything he had ever learned about warfare and survival. But somehow it seemed to work. The alarm started screaming just after breakfast. Was in the middle of reading another section of the Human War Rules when the emergency lights began flashing red throughout the embassy building. Ambassador burst into the room, no longer showing his calm diplomatic smile. Commander, we have a situation. Pirates are attacking a trade convoy in the outer system. Both human and ships are involved. Stood immediately, his military training taking over. How many ships? 5 pirate vessels against 3 cargo ships and 2 escorts. 1 human, 1, said as they hurried toward the communications center. Captain Sarah Williams is commanding our escort ship, the Defender. In the communications room, could hear the battle over the radio. The human captain's voice was calm despite the weapon's fire he could hear in the background. This is Captain Williams to all ships. We're moving to shield the cargo vessels. All civilian ships, begin emergency evacuation procedures. Pirate vessels, you are ordered to withdraw immediately or face defensive action. Clicked in disapproval. She is warning the enemy. This gives them time to prepare for attack. Listen, Ambassador said quietly. Captain Williams' voice continued. Attention pirate ships. We do not wish to cause unnecessary casualties. Surrender now and you will be treated according to standard protocols. Protocols. Secondary arms moved in agitation. She should be destroying them before they can escape or call for reinforcements. The battle started in earnest. Through the communications, could track the progress. The human ship was smaller than the escort, but it moved with precision and purpose. However, instead of going for killing shots, Captain Williams seemed to be targeting engines and weapon systems. Defender to all ships, came the captain's voice. We've disabled 2 pirate vessels. Pirates on ships 3 and 4, your engines are damaged. Surrender now and prepare to be boarded. To some amazement, 2 of the pirate ships actually did surrender. Their communications came across the channel. Human ship, we surrender. Please don't let them take us. His head turned toward Ambassador. They would rather surrender to you than to us. Looked uncomfortable. The Empire has a certain reputation regarding prisoners. The battle continued with the remaining pirate ship, but even then, Captain Williams was calling out warnings before each attack. Pirate vessel, your life support is damaged. Surrender now or your crew is in danger. Finally, the last pirate ship stopped fighting. We surrender, please help us, our environmental systems are failing. Understood, Captain Williams replied immediately. Stand by for emergency assistance. Watch the aftermath through the embassy's telescopic viewers. The human ship moved quickly to help the damaged pirate vessel, sending repair teams and medical personnel across the void to save the lives of people who had just been trying to kill them. This is madness, he muttered, but was watching something else on the displays. Look at the cargo ships. Instead of fleeing the area as fast as possible, The civilian vessels were moving closer. Some were offering to help with repairs. Others were providing space for wounded pirates who needed medical attention. Your civilians are helping the enemy too. They're helping people in distress, corrected. There's a difference. An hour later, Captain Williams arrived at the embassy in person to brief them on the situation. She was a small woman, barely reaching his chest, with short gray hair and steady eyes. "We have 12 prisoners," she reported. 3 wounded, 1 seriously. We also recovered 2 pirate crew members who were being held against their will. They were forced to serve after their own ship was captured. "Excellent," said. "When do we begin interrogation? They must know the location of the main pirate base." Captain Williams looked confused. "Interrogation? Commander, these people are prisoners of war. They'll be treated according to the Covenant Accords." "But they are pirates. They have no legal protection." "Everyone has legal protection under our system," the captain said firmly. "We'll question them, certainly, but within the guidelines for prisoner treatment." Turn to Ambassador. "You are letting valuable intelligence slip away because of these rules." "Actually," Captain Williams interjected, "we've already learned quite a lot. The 2 freed crew members have provided extensive information about pirate operations, and one of the wounded pirates asked to speak with us privately. He wants to cooperate in exchange for protection for his family." "Torture would be faster," insisted. Captain Williams' expression hardened. "Commander, torture doesn't produce reliable intelligence. People will say anything to make pain stop. But when someone chooses to help you because they trust you to keep your word, the information they give is usually accurate." Later that evening, visited the temporary prison facility where the captured pirates were being held. What he saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about handling prisoners. The pirates were being held in clean rooms with proper food and medical care. The seriously wounded pirate was in the same medical bay as the injured human crew members, receiving identical treatment. Found a human soldier named Martinez sitting at a table with a young pirate, maybe 16 years old. The soldier was sharing his meal rations with the prisoner and helping him practice human language. "Why do you do this?" asked the soldier. Martinez looked up, surprised by the question. "He's just a kid, sir. Got mixed up with the wrong people. Maybe if we show him there's a better way to live, he won't go back to piracy when this is over." The young pirate looked up with fear in his eyes. "Please, big alien, don't hurt me. The humans said I would be safe." "You are safe," Martinez said firmly, giving a hard look. "No one will hurt you while you're under our protection." Left the facility feeling more confused than ever. That night, he received a report from the escort captain, Commander Orr. "The humans are weak," Orr reported. "They let valuable prisoners live comfortably instead of extracting information efficiently. However, I must note that 3 of the captured pirates have requested to speak with human authorities. They seem eager to provide information voluntarily." "And the forced crew members?" "Both have asked for asylum in human space. They claim they were kidnapped from civilian ships and forced to work for the pirates. The humans believe their stories." "Do you believe their stories?" There was a pause before Orr answered. "The evidence supports their claims, but even if it did not, the humans would probably still treat them well. They seem unable to be properly suspicious of anyone." After the communication ended, sat in his quarters thinking. The humans had won the battle without losing a single ship. They had captured all the pirates alive. They had rescued enslaved crew members. They had gathered intelligence through voluntary cooperation rather than force. By every measure he knew it should have been impossible. Mercy was weakness. Helping enemies was foolish. Protecting the defeated served no purpose. But somehow, the humans had turned their apparent weakness into victory. Their enemies surrendered rather than fight to the death. Their prisoners provided information willingly. Their reputation for fairness made even criminals trust them over his own people. Picked up the Human War Rules book again. This time, he began reading not with confusion, but with something that might have been wonder. Perhaps there was something here he needed to understand after all. Could not sleep. The pirate incident had shaken something loose in his mind, and he found himself pulling up human military records deep into the night. The embassy had given him access to their historical archives, and what he found there changed everything. He started with humanity's early wars, expecting to find the brutal efficiency he knew from conflicts. Instead, he discovered something that made his head hurt to think about. The humans had been exactly like the once. Their early wars were savage, total affairs where civilians died in massive numbers and prisoners were rarely taken alive. But something had changed them. They nearly destroyed themselves, he whispered, reading about something called World War II. The numbers were staggering. 60 million dead, entire cities burned to ash, weapons that could have ended their species entirely. And then, in the aftermath of that horrible war, something unprecedented happened. Instead of simply claiming victory, the humans had done something no species in galactic history had ever attempted. They had tried to heal their enemies. The defeated nations hadn't been enslaved or destroyed. They had been rebuilt. Former enemies had been turned into allies through treatment so generous it seemed impossible. Within decades, the countries that had been trying to destroy each other were working together as partners. Read deeper into human military history, every major conflict followed a similar pattern. The longer humans fought wars, the more rules they created to limit their own destructive power. They seemed to be deliberately making warfare harder for themselves. But the results spoke for themselves. Human conflicts got shorter, rebellions became rare, former enemies became friends with shocking regularity. It's like they're training themselves to be better at war by being more careful about war, he muttered, his translator struggling with the complex concept. The next morning, he found Ambassador in his office, working on diplomatic reports. Ambassador, I need to understand something. Your species developed these war rules because you were too good at fighting, not too weak. Looked up from his work, studying expression carefully. That's one way to put it. We discovered that our weapons had become so powerful that war itself was becoming too dangerous to survive. So you limited your weapons. We limited how we used our weapons, corrected. The rules didn't make us weaker, they made us smarter. Sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. Explain this to me. How does helping your enemies make you stronger? Leaned back in his chair, thinking. Let me ask you something first. When the Empire conquers a world, how many troops do you need to keep it under control? That depends on the resistance level, usually between 10 and 20% of our total military force per system. So if you control 17 systems, roughly half your entire military is tied up in occupation duties. Had never thought about it that way, but was right. The Empire's fleets were scattered across their territory, keeping rebellions from starting. It was just the natural cost of empire. Now let me tell you about human expansion, continued. We have colonies in over 40 systems. Do you know how many troops we use for occupation duties? 40 systems. His voice showed his surprise. The Empire thought you controlled maybe a dozen. 0 troops, said quietly. We use exactly 0 soldiers for occupation because we don't occupy anyone. Our colonies are there because the people living there want to be part of human space. This was impossible. How can you control territory without controlling the people living there? We don't control the territory, we protect it. There's a difference. Activated his holographic display and showed a map of human space. Every one of these systems asked to join us. Some were former enemies who decided they preferred our way of doing things. Others were neutral worlds that requested our protection from pirates or hostile neighbors. But how do you get enemies to join you? By showing them that we're not actually their enemy. When you treat prisoners well, word spreads. When you protect civilians during conflicts, they remember. When you rebuild instead of destroy after winning a war, people notice. Studied the map. Human space wasn't just larger than he had realized. It was structured completely differently from the Empire. Instead of a central military force controlling conquered territories, it looked like a network of voluntary partnerships. "The pirate attack yesterday," said slowly. "You could have destroyed all their ships easily." "Probably yes. But you chose not to. And now you have prisoners who are giving you information willingly, plus 2 new crew members who want to join your fleet." Nodded. Plus the young pirate who's decided he wants to study human law instead of going back to crime. And the wounded pirate captain who's providing intelligence about 3 other criminal organizations in exchange for protection for his family. You turned an attack against you into a recruitment opportunity. We turned an attack against us into an opportunity to make the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. Was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. What about military discipline? Don't your soldiers question orders when they're told to risk their lives protecting enemies? Actually, our soldiers tend to fight harder when they know they're fighting for something good, not just against something bad, said. When you know you're protecting civilians, saving lives, and offering mercy to defeated enemies, it's easier to risk your own life for the mission. The way is simpler. Soldiers follow orders because they must. And how often do soldiers volunteer for dangerous missions? Thought about this. Dangerous missions were usually assigned by commanders, sometimes as punishment. Volunteering for extra risk wasn't encouraged in the Empire. Human soldiers volunteer for dangerous missions all the time, continued. Especially rescue operations or missions to protect civilians. They want to be part of something that makes them proud. Over the next several days, dove deeper into human military philosophy. He studied their training methods, their promotion systems, their rules of engagement. Everything he learned pointed to the same conclusion. The humans hadn't become powerful despite their rules of war. They had become powerful because of them. Their rules created trust, which meant their allies actually helped them instead of looking for chances to rebel. Their mercy toward enemies meant conflicts ended faster and ended longer. Their protection of civilians meant populations supported them instead of hiding from them. Most importantly, their careful use of force meant they could use overwhelming power when they really needed to, because everyone knew they wouldn't abuse that power. It's like having the strongest weapon in the galaxy, but everyone trusts you with it because you've proven you won't use it unless you absolutely have to, said to himself as he read about human peacekeeping operations. The real revelation came when he discovered records of the few times humans had faced truly existential threats. When their survival was actually at stake, they didn't abandon their rules. Instead, they followed them more carefully than ever. During the Synthesis War, when an artificial intelligence had tried to wipe out all organic life, human forces had been absolutely ruthless toward the AI itself. But they had simultaneously launched massive rescue operations to save the organic populations the AI had enslaved, even when those populations had been fighting for the enemy. The result was that, when the AI was finally defeated, billions of former enemies immediately joined the human alliance. The war that could have destroyed humanity had instead made them the leaders of the largest peaceful coalition in galactic history. They win wars by making sure everyone wants them to win, whispered, staring at the battle records. That night, he sent a message back to the High Command. It was brief and would probably be dismissed as the confused ramblings of a diplomat who had spent too much time around aliens. The humans are not weak. We have misunderstood the nature of strength. Request permission to extend diplomatic mission for further study. The response came back quickly. Permission granted. The High Command is interested in your assessment of human military capabilities. Stared at the message for a long time. They wanted to know about human military capabilities. But how could he explain that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't a gun or a ship or a bomb? How could he tell the High Command that the most dangerous thing about humans was their ability to make their enemies want to become their friends? 6 months later, stood before the High Command, feeling very much like a prisoner himself. The great war room on the capital world was exactly as he remembered, dark metal walls covered with weapons and banners from conquered worlds. 12 of the Empire's most senior commanders sat at a curved table, their multiple arms folded in positions that showed deep skepticism. "Commander," Supreme General spoke from the center of the table, "your reports from human space have been unusual. You claim their military weakness is actually strength." "Yes, Supreme General, I have seen it work repeatedly." "You have spent too much time among aliens," General said dismissively. "The human approach you describe would be suicide for any real military force." Had expected this reaction. "Supreme General, I request permission to present evidence of human military effectiveness." Gestured with 2 of his arms, "Proceed." For the next hour, presented everything he had learned. He showed battle records where human forces had defeated larger enemy fleets through superior strategy and morale. He explained how human rules of war had turned entire enemy populations into allies. He demonstrated how mercy and restraint had become powerful weapons in human hands. The High Command listened in growing disbelief. "This is fantasy," General OK interrupted. "No military force can survive by helping its enemies." "The humans have not just survived, they have prospered," replied. "They control more systems than we do, with half our military budget and no occupation forces." "Impossible." "The numbers are, General. I can provide complete economic and military data." Supreme General raised a hand for silence. "Even if this is true, it proves nothing. Humans are weak. They have never faced a real military threat like the Empire." "Actually, Supreme General, they have faced threats much greater than the Empire, and they have defeated them all using these same principles." The room fell silent. No one in the Empire liked to be reminded that they had never actually tested their strength against the humans directly. "You are suggesting we change 10,000 years of military tradition based on alien nonsense?" General's voice carried dangerous undertones. "I am suggesting we test whether these principles work for us as well as they work for humans." "Test them how?" asked. Had prepared for this question. The 7th Sector Rebellion, instead of the planned total warfare campaign, allow me to try the human approach with one system. The rebellion in the 7th Sector had been growing for months. A group of mining worlds had declared independence and were refusing to send resources to the Empire. The High Command had already approved a massive military operation to crush the rebellion completely and make an example that would prevent future uprisings. "You want us to show mercy to traitors?" OK's voice was filled with disgust. "I want us to try winning a war without destroying everything we're fighting for," replied. The debate that followed was heated and lasted hours. Most of the commanders thought had lost his mind, but Supreme General was interested enough in the potential resource savings to allow a small test. "One system," decided finally. "Prime. If your human methods fail, we proceed with total warfare against all rebel worlds." Prime was the center of the rebellion. If the human approach could work there, it could work anywhere. Took a small fleet to the system, but instead of beginning bombardment, he sent a message to the rebel leadership. "This is Commander of the Empire. I am authorized to discuss terms for ending this conflict peacefully. No harm will come to anyone who agrees to negotiate." The response came back quickly. "This is a trick. The Empire does not negotiate, it only conquers." tried again. I understand your suspicion, but I am offering something new. Safe passage for your representatives to discuss your concerns, medical aid for your wounded, protection for your civilians. It took 3 days of patient communication before the rebels agreed to meet. When their representatives arrived on ship, they were clearly terrified and expecting torture or execution. Instead, offered them food and comfortable quarters. He listened to their complaints about imperial rule, impossible quotas, brutal overseers, families separated and sent to different worlds. For the first time in his career, found himself actually trying to solve problems instead of simply crushing resistance. What if we reduce the quotas to sustainable levels? He asked. What if we allowed families to stay together? What if we replaced the current overseers with administrators chosen by your own people? The rebel leaders were stunned. You would do this? If it ends the rebellion and creates a more productive system, yes. It took 2 weeks of careful negotiation, but eventually they reached an agreement. The mining worlds would return to the Empire, but under completely different conditions. Quotas would be fair, families would be protected, and local leaders would have real authority over their own communities. When reported the success to the High Command, their reaction was predictable. You have given the rebels everything they wanted, General accused. I have ended a rebellion without firing a shot, preserved valuable mining infrastructure, and created a system that should prevent future uprisings, replied. What about our reputation for strength? If word spreads that rebels can negotiate with the Empire, we will have uprisings everywhere. Had prepared for this too. Supreme General, may I share what has actually happened since the agreement was reached? Over the following months, word of the agreement had indeed spread throughout the Empire. But instead of encouraging more rebellions, something unexpected had occurred. 3 other systems had contacted the Empire directly, requesting similar negotiations to address their own problems before rebellion became necessary. 2 border worlds had asked to join the Empire voluntarily after hearing that they were now willing to listen to local concerns. Most surprising of all, productivity in the 7th sector had increased by 40%, as the mining worlds worked enthusiastically under their new conditions. They are producing more resources than they did under the old system, reported, and they are doing it willingly. Supreme General studied the production reports carefully. These numbers are. Yes, Supreme General, when people work for fair treatment instead of under threat of death, they work much harder. For the first time since had returned from human space, the High Command looked genuinely interested rather than skeptical. Show us more, ordered. Over the next year, was given authority to apply human principles to other problem areas in the Empire. Each test was a small revelation. Border conflicts that had lasted decades ended in weeks when the Empire offered protection instead of conquest. Trade disputes were resolved through negotiation instead of force. Even piracy dropped dramatically when former criminals were offered legitimate work in Imperial security forces. The most dramatic change came when news of reforms reached other galactic powers. For the first time in Imperial history, alien governments began requesting meetings with representatives. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges were proposed. We are becoming more powerful by becoming less frightening, explained to a new class of young officers he was training in human military philosophy. One of the officers raised her hand. But Commander, doesn't this make us weak? If we do not crush our enemies, how do they know to fear us? Thought about Ambassador, about Captain Williams, about all the humans he had watched turn their enemies into friends through strength, guided by wisdom. Cadet, he said finally, there is a difference between being feared and being respected. When people fear you, they obey only as long as you are stronger. But when people respect you, they work with you because they want to. But what if we face a real threat, an enemy who will not listen to negotiation? "Then we fight," replied without hesitation. "But we fight as the empire that protects the innocent, that shows mercy to the defeated, that builds instead of destroys. We fight as warriors who are strong enough to choose when not to use our strength." He looked around the room at the young faces watching him. "The humans taught me something important. True strength is not about how much destruction you can cause. True strength is about how much destruction you choose not to cause. And if our enemies mistake this for weakness," smiled, an expression he had learned from humans, "then they will be very surprised when we show them exactly how strong we really are. The difference is that when the fighting is over, they might want to join us instead of planning their revenge." As the class ended and the young officers filed out, looked through the window at the capital city of the empire. It looked different now than it had a year ago. There were alien traders in the markets. Cultural exchange students from other worlds walked the streets. Former rebels worked alongside imperial citizens in government offices. The empire was stronger than it had ever been, not because it had conquered more worlds, but because it had learned to make friends out of enemies and allies out of strangers. Humanity's rules of war had indeed destroyed understanding of strength and weakness, but what they had built in its place was something far greater than what had come before. An empire based not on fear, but on the radical idea that the strongest warriors were those who knew when to put down their weapons and extend their hand instead.